Welcome everybody to our baking session. So we're on week 3, I think. I'm losing track now. So week 1 we covered. Sorry, somebody said I have my camera off. That's fine. So week 1 we did stock paste. So we did chicken stock paste and vegetable stock paste. We talked about just having a couple of lovely basics in your fridge and the fact that they're way easier than you think. You know, sometimes it's just a case of just putting it in your diary to do, putting it in your planner and getting it done. So things like curry pastes, pesto, all of those sort of things are so delicious and so easy to make in your Thermomix. So I highly recommend you give those a go. So yeah, so week 1 we did stock paste and we did soup. We also looked at how you might adapt a recipe from a cookbook. So we looked at some of setting it up manually using time, temperature, speed of the blade. We also looked at a couple of the shortcut modes like chop and blend. So then week 2, we looked at steaming. So we mostly looked at the Varoma, which so many people kind of shy away from because they put it in their cupboard and they forget about it. But our lovely Varoma, which I'm just going to put up there for a minute, our lovely Varoma is so versatile. So if you haven't seen that recording, you can, or if you didn't see that class, you can go back and watch the recording. And then this week we're talking about baking. So I was going to attempt to do all sorts of baking, so sweet and savory, and actually there's just so much to talk about. So I've broken it up into 2 sections. So tonight we're just going to talk about bread. Which is, you know, something that I hear from a lot of customers that A, they're loving baking bread for the first time ever, or B, they're scared and they don't know what to do and they don't know where to start. And I just want to reassure you that it is really easy. I am not a master baker. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm not an expert. However, I can produce really decent bread in my Thermomix. But there is, you know, you could spend a long time learning about the intricacies and the science behind baking. You know, it's really fascinating. And for anybody who's ever gotten into sourdough baking, you'll know that there's a lot of love goes into it in terms of the timeline that needs for proving and the baking that happens. But tonight we're going to do a couple of really simple breads that I think that are quite a good place to start. I've got lots of other suggestions for you as well. I'm just going to take that out of the way just so that you can see what I'm doing. Just pop that back on again. Or you can see the finger marks on that. Ooh, ignore. So yeah, so we're gonna do a couple of breads tonight. So the first one is one that I'm just about to pop in the oven actually, and I'm going to talk about this more in a few minutes, but I want it to be done by the end of this session. So this is Portuguese water bread. And just before it goes in the oven, I'm going to talk to you about shaping this bread because I know some people that have attempted it had some problems with it just going everywhere because it's quite a wet dough. So I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But just before I do that, I'm just going to talk to you quickly about the sensor. So I'm just going to take that out and hopefully that will come up there. Is it going to come up? Thermomix sensor. There we go. Okay. So the Thermomix sensor is it is a separate product, and some of you have it, I know, and maybe again you may not have used it. So it's not absolutely essential. So don't worry if you don't have it. But I'm just going to use it because I have it here, and I've had some questions about it. So the sensor is a bit like it's a thermometer basically that goes in. Sorry, let me just let in a couple of extra people. There we go. Yeah, the sensor is a thermometer that goes into the center of whatever it is you're cooking, and it'll give you a read on the Thermomix, and there's an app that comes with it as well. So it's a bit like the meter, if you've ever come across that. Except for this, you can use it for meat and for bread and for cakes and all sorts of things. So I quite like that. But you can definitely just put it, I'm going to talk to you about how you know your bread is done without one of these as well. But I'm just going to set this one up. So there's a sensor shortcut mode on the TM6, which and I'll talk to you about the TM7 in a second because it's slightly different. But let me just show you where I went to for that. So it's a shortcut mode on the TM6. I go into my temperature, click on that, and then I just pick what it is that I want to measure using my sensor. So I'm going to pick bread. I'm going to pick the basic dough. and it wants it to get to 96 degrees. So I'm going to pop my sensor in. There's a little notch about halfway up there, and that just needs to be inside of whatever it is you're cooking. And you want the tip of your sensor to go into the thickest part of whatever it is you're baking. So if you're following a recipe that uses the sensor, it's actually going to give you those instructions, and in some instances it'll actually give you a video as well, so you can see what you're doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Stick that into the thickest part. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to into my oven. Okay, so we'll circle back to that in a few minutes. And so I'm kind of doing this slightly backwards, but you'll see why in a few minutes. Anne Clark is trying to get in. Let me let her in. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, so if you've just joined me, you're very, very welcome. And we're doing breads tonight. So we're going to do the Portuguese water bread, which you've probably seen lots of Thermomix advisors doing. It's a really popular one to do. And we're also going to do some quick bread rolls. Now the quick bread rolls, I wanted to do those just because I'll be able to make them, and yeah, well, actually I've got some that I've baked earlier, but they're really, really quick. So I just thought they might be a good one to do. But essentially with those quick bread rolls, you put them into a cold oven, so you don't need to, and they prove as they're warming up in the oven. So yeah, so we'll start with the quick bread rolls. So let's go in there. So I'm going to do this on my TM7. So I'm just going to say, in terms of using the sensor, there is not a shortcut mode on the TM7 for now. I'm sure there will be very soon. So for now, you can either use it manually by using the Cooking Center app, and there's instructions on how to get that when you have your sensor, or I can help you with that as well. Or if you're following a recipe where it uses the sensor, it will prompt you at the right spot to use the sensor. So there's not a shortcut mode for the sensor just yet on the TM7. I'm not entirely sure why actually, but anyway, I'm sure there's a reason for it. Okay, so we've got our quick bread rolls, and yeah, let's get going with it. So let's press start. And showing you a recipe like this, adding in the ingredients, it's pretty much the same for most recipes. There are a couple that have longer kneading times, like for example, brioche, you need for quite a long time. But this part is reasonably the same. Okay, so I'm going to take my lid off, and I am going to put in 200 grams of water. So I'm going to measure this in, and obviously the weighing scales is coming up because it's a guided recipe that I'm using. Just checking that, just checking that I'm on 0 before I start, and I'll put in my water. Go, gone over a teeny tiny bit, but that's okay. Right, and then I'm going to just heat this up a little bit. And so the reason that you do this, and you can do this anytime that you're making bread actually, is start with slightly warmer water. It just helps to activate the yeast more quickly. So if you've got a bread recipe that you're doing and it doesn't ask for warm water, but you're in a bit of a hurry, just start off with slightly warm water, and that'll help. So this is it's heating at 37 degrees, so kind of body temperature. You don't want to go too hot, obviously, because you don't want to kill the yeast. So yeast is a live product, and it actually consumes the sugars. So in this case, it's going to be the gluten and the starch. So the yeast starts to digest that, and that's what produces those air bubbles. And in a sourdough, of course, you're not using an added yeast, you're actually using kind of an airborne yeast. You start with a starter, and that fermentation happens over a longer period of time and creates that kind of sourness, the same as you would get with a yogurt or a kombucha. So I'm going to just talk to you about the 2 yeasts that I have here now in a second. Okay, so I've warmed up my water a little bit, so that's just going to help to get everything going. And then I've got my flour going in. Okay, so I've got 330 grams of flour going in there. Lightly after because I stole a bit for my Portuguese water bread a minute ago. There we go. Okay, perfect. And then I've got a little bit of olive oil going in. So there's 10 grams of olive oil. Definitely don't want to go over with that because it's so expensive right now. Okay, and then I've got dried yeast, 1.5 teaspoons. Or you'll see there's some little arrows that go backwards. By the way, if anybody does want to follow along with this, it's called Quick Bread Rolls in your Cookie Do app if you want to have a look at it while we're cooking. So yeah, so the next part of this is the yeast. So it says either 1.5 teaspoons of dried yeast or 15 grams of fresh yeast crumbled. So I just wanted to show you both of these things because I think it's really nice to know what options you have. Are you all right, darling? Not yet, no. No, I need it for the moment. Sorry, darling. It's my little boy trying to take my computer from me. How am I taking this out? Okay, just while I'm opening this. So in terms of using dried yeast, I've had a couple of people recently that their bread didn't work out. And actually, when we went through it, we kind of workshopped it to try and find out what went wrong. And what I figured out was their yeast was probably stale. It was probably a bit old. If you're buying dried yeast in that little, so you can get it in a little tin, which is, it's not a huge amount. It's quite a nice amount, but if you are buying that, and it does have a use by date, and once you've opened that seal on it, you must keep it in the fridge. So if you've bought a yeast in a tin and it's sitting up in your cupboard and you haven't used it in a while, it's probably dead. So if your bread isn't rising, that's something to have a think about. So I quite like buying these ones, just because I go through phases of making bread. So but at least they're one you use either half of that or a whole one, depending on what sort of bread you're making. And then at least I know it's fresh. So I find those quite good. But for today, I just thought I would show you some fresh yeast as well. So I got this in the Polish shop today. And yeah, so if you're in Jersey, the Polish shop just near oh God, I can never remember the name of that street where Bill's is, and what else? Right beside the fish market. So that one has the Polish shop has fresh yeast. If you're elsewhere watching this in the UK or Ireland, check with your local baker because sometimes they're happy to sell you a bit or even give you a bit. So Vienna Bakery here in Jersey, they're generally happy to either sell you a bit of it or give you a bit of it, but you can definitely buy it from the Polish shop here. Maybe in the UK where you've got more choice, maybe there's other places that you can buy it. So there's 15 grams of fresh yeast. So I'm going to just bring up my weighing scales. And sorry, just to show you what that looks like, it kind of just looks like tofu actually. So it's kind of like and it smells like yeast. It smells kind of beery. And you definitely keep this in the fridge. And you would use it, I don't know what its expiration is, but you would just keep it refrigerated because that's going to keep it alive. Okay, so I've got 15 grams going in there. And when you're using this, you just crumble it in. So you can just use your fingers to just crumble it in. Not quite there. But yeah, people that bake bread all the time, they often love using fresh yeast. It gives a nice result. I'm gonna pop that back in the fridge while I think about it. Keep my yeast fresh. And by the way, if anybody has any questions along the way, please feel free to unmute yourself. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as well. Oh, there is some chat there, or just a few hellos. Sorry, I have yeah, that's fine.
Michelle,
Okay.
if you wanted to make the quick bread rolls with wholemeal bread flour, what would you have to change about the cooking time or anything in the recipe that you would have to change if you made these with wholemeal rather than plain flour?
Yeah, so it depends what you want to come out with. So sometimes I'll swap out some of the plain flour for wholemeal. If you use all wholemeal, it tends to be denser. But wholemeal does give a really nice flavor and some texture. You don't really need to you don't really need to cook it for much longer. But yeah, I'm not sure the answer on that. I don't think you need to cook it for any longer. Um, in terms of the lightness of the bread, these rolls that I'm going to show you now are designed to go into a cold oven, kind of prove along the way, and you've got a bread roll by after about 20 or 30 minutes, and they're pretty decent. However, if you want a really light roll, I would suggest giving it time to prove, and definitely having that wholemeal flour in there. I would be inclined to give it some nice proving time, because you're going to get more aeration, because yeah. So that's what I would do if I was doing these. So this particular recipe, we often do it a demonstration at somebody's house, just because we can produce a pretty decent bit of bread in a short amount of time. And I just thought it might be a nice one to demo. Okay, so in there, so we've got our we've got our fresh yeast, we've got our olive oil, we've got our strong white bread flour, and we've got a little bit of sugar going in there, half a teaspoon. And again, we're putting that sugar in there just to help to feed that yeast. And again, this is a quick bread, so we want that yeast to work as quickly as possible. So with our Portuguese water bread, we don't put any sugar in. In fact, we don't put anything other than flour and yeast and water, a little bit of salt. So this one has a few more ingredients. So in there, so I put my sugar. It's got 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Pop that in. Now, just in terms of putting salt into your bread, what I generally do is if I've just put yeast in, you might have seen me, I've just pushed it to one side, and I'm going to put salt in kind of on the other side. You want to keep the salt and the yeast separated from each other until, I mean, obviously it's all going to be kneaded in a minute, but just the salt will kill the yeast if it's just put on directly. So if you had all of your yeast in one spot and you put your salt on top of it, it's just going to dampen down the effect of it. So I'm just going to put my salt on the other side. Sometimes people put like a layer of flour between the two. And obviously it's all going to get kneaded together. So they will come into contact with each other. But yeah, I don't know how to explain it other than that. But yeah, that's it. Okay, so this salt has gone in there, and I just press next. And we're just going to give that a little mix around. 15 seconds. Sorry, apologies. I'm having to do a big balancing act with this computer so that I can fit everything in. Get back again. Okay, so I've given that a little mix around, and I'm just going to scrape down my sides. Just to show you what that looks like at this stage. Yeah. So that's my bread mixed around, all those ingredients mixed around. And I've scraped down the sides. And then we're going to knead it. Okay, so that's going to knead for 3 minutes. And you can see that it's kind of bobbing around there a little bit. I would say if you're kneading bread, it's one of the times that I wouldn't walk away from a Thermomix. And if I'm not sure if my mother-in-law is on here at the moment, I know she couldn't join earlier. She did that one day. She turned around and her Thermomix hopped off the side.
I am here, Michelle.
How are you? So
I'm back.
a cautionary tale from my lovely mother-in-law to don't turn your back on your kneading bread. So you can see that's, yeah, it's moving around a fair bit. Woo, jumping around. The whole kitchen is shaking. So yeah, so times that I wouldn't walk away from my Thermomix is definitely kneading bread. Also, if you're chopping or yeah, doing a very vigorous mix of something that's got lots of ingredients in there, some big ingredients. So for example, chopping big chunks of butternut squash, for example, you're going to get quite a bit of movement there. So things like that, you know, you want to stay close to your Thermomix. Obviously, once it's cooking, you know, so whether it's slow cooking or it's just simmering for a while, you can walk away. You know, you can go and have your cup of tea, or you know, it's the joy of Thermomix, isn't it, that you can leave it while it's cooking, and you know, it's not going to burn or anything like that. So word, it really is moving around. So just that's got another minute and a half. So just while that's happening, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about adapting your own recipes for bread, because I'm going to try and bring that in each week that we're on here, because that's always a major question. How do I cook my own recipes? How do I cook my favorite you know, cookbook writers recipes? So I've got lovely Rachel Allen here, Food for Living. Lovely book if you've ever got a chance to come across it, as she's an Irish chef. She's actually the daughter-in-law of a lady called Dorina Allen, who is the founder or the owner of a company called Ballymaloo in Ireland, and she's a bit of a national treasure in Ireland. Actually, we love her to bits. Okay, so this recipe that I'm going to look at is called wholemeal honey bread, page 62. And if anybody's interested in this, I'm happy to share this recipe for you. Okay, so wholemeal honey bread. There's not a lot to. Oh, yeah, there's a nice picture actually. There's her lovely wholemeal honey bread. So she's got her ingredients listed down, so that's easy enough. So we know that we know that we can weigh everything that we need to in our Thermomix. So if you were cooking a recipe like this manually, so just, you know, out of your cookbook, what are you going to do? You're going to bring up your weighing scales first of all, and you're going to weigh in the ingredients as you need to do them. So with this recipe, she says, in a small bowl, mix the warm water with honey, add yeast, and leave to stand for 5 minutes until slightly frothy. Okay, I'll come back to that in a second. So she's got 450 mils of warm water, 3 tablespoons of honey, 3 teaspoons of dried or fast-acting yeast, or 40 grams of fresh yeast. And then she's got her strong white bread flour, 600 grams. I'll share this afterwards, so don't worry about remembering this if you're interested. And she's got 300 grams of wholemeal flour. So you were asking about the cooking with wholemeal. So yeah, so with this particular recipe, she talks about having warm water with some honey, so that's that sweetness to help with the yeast, and adding the yeast. So what I would do is I would measure in my water. So I would go into my well, let's do this on the 6 actually, just so that I can show you. You see that okay? Okay, so I've got my time, temperature, speed of the blade, the 3, and on the 7 we'd be opening up manual cooking. But the first thing that we need to do is open up our weighing scales. So I would be adding into there my water, my honey, and my yeast. And then I would put it on to warm for a couple of minutes. So I'd probably put it on for 2 minutes probably at 37 degrees. So a bit like we did with that quick bread roll recipe. And yeah, and that's going to start to activate the yeast and get everything moving. And then it talks about putting flours into a big mixing bowl, so your plain flour and your wholemeal flour, and mixing those together with salt and rubbing in the butter. Now with our Thermomix, we can just add in everything together actually. So you can just weigh in your wholemeal flour, your strong white flour, your butter as well. So you can put that in at the same time, and the salt. So everything can go in at the one time, and then you're going to give it a mix. So at that stage, so we've weighed everything in. So we need to go back then into our time, temperature, speed of the blade, which is on that home screen. Or if you're in the 7, if you're using the 7, let me just go into that. You're going into modes and you're going into manual mode. Okay, so that's where you're going to set up whatever you need to set up. So in this instance, I would give this because I'm wanting to chop up the butter as well. I would chop it up probably for about maybe 20 or 30 seconds on about speed 5, and that's gonna just chop that butter through the flour, through everything else. And then the next part, which is the funky shortcut mode part, is that you're going to go into the knead function. So this recipe talks about knead by hand on a floured surface or in the mixer for about 10 minutes. It may only take 5 minutes in a mixer until the dough is smooth and springy. Okay, so at that stage of the recipe, so I've weighed in everything, I've given it all a chop or a mix, and then I'm going to go across to my dough mode. So it looks like a little sheaf of wheat, and it looks like a little sheaf of wheat on my 7 as well. There we go, dough. And then I'm going to set up my time for kneading. So the kneading function activates the dough, and then it stops, and it does that repeatedly. And what that's doing is it's activating that gluten, and then it's letting the gluten relax, and then it's working it again, and then it's relaxing again. So depending on what sort of recipe you're doing, what sort of bread dough you're doing will depend on how much kneading it needs. But in this case, she talks about 5 minutes being enough in a mixer. So what I would do is I would put it on for 5, and then I would check my dough and see what it looks like. So I would just set up my time. So set it up to, let's say, the 5 minutes. And then just activate. Now I actually have something in there at the moment, so I'm not going to do that, but I would just, for those shortcut modes, and I'll do this on the 7 as well. So on the 7, I've actually got I've got shortcuts on my shortcut mode, so I can actually just skip straight to 5. There we go. And I just press play on that. So on the 7, it's even easier, although the 6 is very, very easy as well. But that's it. And then that does the kneading for you. So I think that's, it's really simple. I think, sometimes people aren't sure about doing their own recipes. My general advice, probably with anything on the Thermomix, is try a cookie dough recipe first of all. Maybe find something that's similar to what you're trying to cook, just to get a bit of confidence using your Thermomix. So if you're reasonably new to Thermomix, start off with the cookie dough recipes just because they work, and it'll give you a feel for, what the different functions do. And just keep an eye on what's happening, so you'll see that dough mode come up in a you can hear a remote control car going down our hallway at the moment. So yeah, you'll see that shortcut mode coming up when you're doing your bread, when you're following a guided cookie dough recipe. So in this instance, we're just bringing that up as a shortcut mode. Okay, does anybody have any questions at all about adapting recipes in the bread sense of things?
Michelle, I want to know how when you look at a recipe, it normally says so many mils of water or mils of fluid. How do you convert that to grams in the weighing scales? Because they never talk of volume of liquid, they always talk of weight.
So with Thermomix,
if you're using your own recipe, it normally would give you a literage of water, a fluid, not a weight, whereas the Thermomix scales relies only on weight.
Yes, but because it's metric, it should be the same. So a liter of milk should be 1,000 grams of water. Or sorry, like a liter of water should be 1,000 grams of water. So it should be, yeah, it should. So it's not, you're actually not measuring volume, you're measuring weight. So so it's different to like in American cooking where they talk about cups of things.
Yeah, okay, I'll try that. I hadn't thought that correlated, but okay, I'll try that. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, let me just Hitton. Just going to close the door. I don't know if you can hear that remote control car going. I can hear it. Okay, so yeah, so everything in the Thermomix is measured in grams. So liquids and solids are all measured in that way, and because it's metric, it should be fine. So if you're seeing, here it's talking about 450 mils of warm water, so I'd be putting 450 grams.
Okay, thank you. Right.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect. So yeah, so that's basically it. So with that wholemeal honey bread from lovely Rachel Allen, that's it basically. So I've kneaded my bread, and then I just have a look at what else does it talk about. Diddle diddle do, and then it just talks about letting it rise. So doing the proving side of things. Allowed to rest on a work surface covered with a tea towel for 5 minutes before shaping it. I usually shape this in 2 round or oval loaves, but of course you can make individual rolls if you wish as well. Okay, so yeah, so that's just a nice little example of taking a recipe from a cookbook and adapting it for your purposes. Right. Sorry, just bear with me a second. Okay, cool. 2923, perfect. So I'm just coming back to my quick bread rolls. So I've done the where did we get to? We did the mixing and we did the kneading, didn't we? So I've got my dough ready to go. So let's have a little look and see what that looks like in there. So nice and smooth. And now I'm going to just tip it out onto my baking sheet. Hang on. Use this big one. I'm just going to move this back because I want to be able to show you what I'm doing in terms of shaping these. Yeah, hopefully you'll be able to see that. So I'm going to put, so again, I'm just going to have a little look at the recipe on here. So putting the dough onto a lightly floured surface. So we'll just put a little bit of flour onto, I've just got a baking mat that I'm using here, a silicone baking mat. These Thermomix ones are really nice, by the way. So, I mean, you can get them from Lakeland or you can get them from Amazon as well, but okay, perfect. So I'm just going to tip my dough out onto there. So if you're finding the dough isn't coming out quickly, you can access the blade just from the bottom of the bowl, and exactly the same on the 6. So you can just give that a little twizzle. If it's really stiff, with your 7 spatula, you've got like a little shape here that you can put on top of that, and that just helps to, just if you're finding it tough to turn, that can just help you. You should be able to do it with your fingers, but sometimes it's really stiff. That's coming out, so I'm just going to give that a little help with my spatula. So with some bread doughs, they just come out all in one go and you've got nothing left in your bowl. It comes out really cleanly. Others, you do have a little bit left around the blades. So if you've got anything left around your blades, if you just put your lid back on and just give it a little whiz around. So this recipe actually prompts you to do this, but you can do this for any sort of batter, so cake batter, your bread dough. Just Let's go back to that. There we go. So if there's any dough remaining on your blades, just pop your lid on and just a couple of goes on turbo. Yeah, we'll stop that. And then what that does is it just sends anything that's on the blades out to the side of the bowl, and it just makes it much easier to get out. So I find that, you know, when I started on my Thermomix journey and making cakes, I used to get really frustrated because there was so much stuff around the blades. And then somebody showed me that and I was like, oh yeah, of course. It sounded so logical when somebody told me. In Australia, we used to call that the flick. So flicking the dough off. Just a word of warning, I think I've probably said this before on here, but just when you're using your spatula in your bowl to get things out, do make sure you're going clockwise, because that lovely soft blade, and particularly in the 7, it's even softer, and which is great for getting around and getting things out. But if you go anti-clockwise, you're going to go into the sharp side of the blades. So just be careful of that. Okay, perfect. So that is that. So that's my lovely dough for my quick rolls. And then, so I just wanted to show you some shaping stuff. So, so if I just, I'm going to put a little bit more flour on there. And then I'm just going to use my spatula to chop this up into 4. And then I'm going to take my, so that was the alarm that was going before for my sensor, saying that we have reached time to go. Oh, it looks so nice. Oh. So there we go, that's what that looks like. So I'm just going to put that to one side for the moment, just to let it cool a little bit. Of course, we don't want to chop it while it's hot. That's why I wanted to have it done a little bit ahead of time. How are we doing on time? 7:41. Okay, perfect. So I've got my bread rolls. So what do I do with them? So I want to get them into lovely roll shapes. So so I'm going to shape them. So I'm going to grab my little roll and I'm going to just fold the sides into the middle. And I'm just going to put a little bit of flour on my hands as well. So I just turn those rolls round and around, like so. And then I turn them over. And what I'm going to do then is that, so what this is doing is it's building up, oh, somebody's in the waiting room. Let me just let them in. What this is doing is it's building up some of the surface tension, and it just helps with the structure. So this is, and you would do this with bread as well, is tucking and then what I'm doing is I'm using my hands, and I don't know if you can see that, but I'm kind of creating like a little seam underneath. And you can, once you've done this a few times, you can be really quick with it actually. But what you should end up with then, when you've done it, is you should end up with a perfectly round little bun, little roll ready to go in the oven. And then it's going to bake really nice and evenly. It's going to rise evenly. If you want to put a glaze on there, so for some rolls, you might want to put an egg wash, for example, on there. Don't go down the sides of it because that will stop the rising process. So it'll literally stick the dough together. So if it's a recipe that calls for a glaze on top, just brush it onto the very top of it, and then you could put your, your sesame seeds or your whatever it is you're wanting to put on top. So I'll just do 2 just so that I can show you what that looks like. But there you go. What a lovely set of buns. So they are ready to go in the oven, or you could do them in the Verona. So let me just put this out of the way for a second and I can tell you more about that. Actually, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Okay, so just to show you what they look like when they come out of the oven, they looked like this. There we go. So yeah, so they bake really nicely. And I only have 3 on here because my boys devoured one of them when it came out of the oven. It was lovely. So what I would say about these quick bread rolls is if you need bread in a real hurry, you've got somebody coming for lunch and you just want to have some nice fresh bread, they're great. They're going to be much lighter if you prove them for a while. So what does proving mean? Proving means you're giving it time for that yeast to act. Often you'll have a double proving time. So you'll have a time where it's proving in a bowl, you shape it, get it ready to put in the oven, and then you let it rise a little bit more. So yeah, so it just depends on the particular type of recipe that you're doing. You can also use the Verona to prove your dough, and it doesn't really take any less time. I thought that was a shortcut when I came across it first. So the fermentation mode can be used to prove bread. So if you want to have a look at, and I'll put this link in the notes when I send it out afterwards, have a look at the artisanal, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, bread. Have a look at that recipe, and it talks about proving it in the Verona. Yeah, not a lot quicker, but what you do get is you get it because you've got some steam coming up through it. It just is a lovely prove. It ends up really light, actually. So that's quite a nice thing that you could try as well. We will talk more about fermentation mode a little bit further along. But yeah, but I just wanted to mention that this evening. And the other thing, I know we did Verona last week, but just another thing to use your Verona for is steaming buns. So there's a lovely recipe called it's pulled pork with steamed buns, and it's a very similar type of a recipe, just just a standard basic dough, and you can just pop it into your Verona, and you can steam it either. You can steam it over water, obviously, or with that particular recipe, you were steaming your buns over the pulled pork that was cooking. Somebody else is trying to come in. So yeah, so just remembering that your Verona can be used to steam things like bread and cake as well, I think is just, and you get just a slightly different result. So obviously the these rolls that went in the oven have a lovely crust, and they're they're a little bit browned, and they look really nice. The buns that you would do in your Verona are going to be much more spongy. They're going to be very pale as well. So really good for Vietnamese bao bun, for example. So that are they're traditionally very pale and spongy, and so that's a nice thing that you can do it for. If you did have your buns that you were doing for your pulled pork, for example, if you had them cooked in there and you just wanted to brown them, you could always put them under a hot grill for a few minutes, just to get that coloration. So yeah, so I just wanted to show you that as well. Any questions so far? Please feel free to unmute yourself. I know a couple of people have just joined. Welcome if you have. Not yet. Okay. So I'm going to just get my mat over again. I'm just going to put that dough to the side. So I wanted to show you, so the Portuguese water bread. So this is something that it kind of was a bit viral, I suppose, because one person did it and then everybody did it. And it's a lovely recipe. It's so easy, and it requires very, very little work. It basically, you weigh in your water, you weigh in your bread flour, and then you just let that soak. So it hydrates, the flour hydrates for about 40 minutes. Then you come back, you add in your yeast and your salt, and that's it, I think. Anything else? Nope, that's it. And then you just let it sit in your bowl for 2 hours, and it rises. So it's yeah, so it's very little work, and then you just tip it out. But where some people fall foul with this particular recipe is that it's quite a wet dough, and so they pour it out and it goes everywhere, and they don't know what to do with it. So I just wanted to show you this. So so I think the secret, not really the secret, the trick to this is you need lots and lots of flour. So don't be shy, because it's really, really sticky. So, and you'll see this when I'm going to try and do this without it sticking to all of me. So, okay. Right, so this dough, when I mixed this, so when I had my flour hydrating, and then I added in my other ingredients, I did my kneading, the the dough came to about there. So the mixture came to about there in the bowl. This is it after a couple of hours. So it's come right the way to the top. And I can see, looking in there, I don't know if you can see that, there's a lot of aeration going in there, so, and a lot of bubbles, which is brilliant. It's exactly what we want. So I'm going to just pour this out, and sometimes this comes out all in one go, other times it's really hard to get out. Let's try it. Can you see all that coming out? So don't worry if it looks like a bit of a mess at the moment. It's not a problem. We will work with it. Yeah, so really wet and kind of messy looking. So don't worry, it's you trust the process. I'm just getting as much of that out as I can with my spatula. And again, I've got quite a bit stuck around the blade, so I'll just pop on my lid. And I'll go into my shortcut modes. Oh, the other way. It's hard doing things upside down sometimes. And I'm going to go into my turbo button and just give that a little.
What is the best sort of flour to use?
So definitely strong blend flour. And it'll be called strong blend flour.
Okay.
So it's a different gluten content than you have in just plain flour. So you can do a lot of these recipes with plain flour, but it just won't get as light and as airy as strong bread flour. So I sometimes like to get the Canadian strong flour. That's really nice to use. I get that in Waitrose as well. But yeah, any shop you should be able to get bread flour. So some people add bread improver as well. I don't bother, but some people really like to use that again, just to get it even lighter and fluffier. But in all honesty, what's going to give you that aeration, you know, that nice lightness of texture, is just giving it enough time to prove. So obviously with those quick rolls, they're just a speedy version, and they're a little bit heavier. Right, so I've got my Portuguese water bread, which at the moment looks like a puddle. And that's the bit where some people go, oh, it went wrong. I had a puddle and it went everywhere and it fell off the side of the baking mat. So what you want to do is you want to put quite a bit of flour. So there's quite a lot of flour underneath it, if you remember. I'm putting more on top of it and putting more on my hands as well, because it's really sticky. And then what I'm going to do is I am just going to kind of roll it up. There we go. And then I'm going to just like tuck it in like you'd tuck a baby into bed. Tucking those blankets underneath and just making sure I've got plenty of flour. And then can you see that it's looking really pillowy and soft? But again, what you're doing by this folding mechanism here is you're just building up that structure, and so that it doesn't slop out the side. So you can either put this into a baking, like a tin, or you can put it, so I did mine on one of the stoneware dishes, one of the Thermomix stonewares, which is quite nice. It bakes really nicely. But I could put it into, do I have one of my, yeah, this tin. So I might make this more into like a loaf shape. Just put some flour in there as well. So that's just like a stoneware dish. So I let the other one be kind of free form, and this one I'm just gonna, so basically think about tucking it in like a baby. And then you're just going to lift it kind of gently there, and then I've just popped it into my dish like that. So we've created that kind of surface tension. We've folded it in. It's going to give it that structure. And then what you want to do is you want to get a really sharp knife, or my knives need sharpening. So I'm actually going to use a scissors, and I'm just going to cut some little bits just to allow it to cook and rise evenly. So if I just show you what that looks like. Oh, can you see it without me slopping it out there? So yeah, so if you have, there's a proper knife that you can buy for bread. You know, you'll often see people making sourdough having it. It looks a bit like a Stanley knife, like a really thin, or a craft knife. And you're just going to slit that down, and that's just going to allow the yeah, it's just going to allow the rising action to happen more evenly. It'll cook more evenly as well. So that's it. So that'll go into a pretty hot oven actually. So that'll go in at 250 degrees. And then, you know, if you're not using a sensor, you just gonna, it does give you an indication as to how much time to put it on for. Let me just wash my hands down so that I can handle other things. Yeah, so I think when you're making bread, you have to be prepared to get slightly messy hands. It kind of goes with the territory. There we go. But yeah, but in general, the rule with bread is that you're gonna put it into the oven for the amount of time, and then you can check it by, if you get your bread, and it should feel reasonably light, and I don't know if you can hear that, but it should can you hear that? Maybe not. You should be able to knock on it and it should sound hollow. So that is your sign that your bread is baked. Obviously, when it's just come out of the oven, it's going to be pretty hot. You might need to use a tea towel with it. But how nice does that bread look? So really, really good. So yeah, so that's it. So so what have we talked about tonight? So we've talked about type of flour. Thank you for that question. We've talked about yeast. We've talked about using a cookie dough recipe on the 6 and the 7. We've talked about shortcut modes, so adapting your own bread recipe. We looked at one from Rachel Allen, and we looked at, you know, using your weighing scales to weigh your ingredients, setting up time, speed of the blade to do your mixing, and then using the kneading function shortcut mode on the 6 and the 7. We've also talked about using the sensor, and you making sure that the tip of that sensor is going right into the middle of whatever it is you're cooking, and making sure the notch, that's the reference notch halfway up, is in the bread loaf. And the fact that you can use that as a shortcut mode on your TM6, and the 7 either as part of a recipe, or you need to use the app that it comes with. So yeah, so I think, did we cover, is there anything else we talked about? I think that's pretty much it. Is there any question? We're just coming up to the hour now. Is there any questions? And what I might do is I might just unpin myself so that I can see everybody. Participants. Remove spotlight. Okay, there we go. So I'll just get rid of that. Lovely. Dorothy, you have a question?
Yeah, so I've got a habit of making 5 seed bread.
Okay.
Absolutely gorgeous. And it's obviously the nicest on the day that you make it. And on the second day, what I do is I slice it and I freeze it. But if I wanted to make the dough the night before, so that it's ready to bake in the morning, is it okay to leave the dough in the fridge overnight? Or if it says leave it to proof for an hour, do I need to bake it straight away? Or could I leave it in the fridge before I actually bake it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dorothy. And actually, it was something I meant to cover tonight, the fact that, you know, sometimes you might want to have bread in the morning, and the thing to do is, yeah, make your dough the night before. Thanks, Alison. Make your dough the night before, and you don't bother with the proving step. You just put it straight in your fridge. So because the yeast will, it will be working, but it'll just work more slowly in your fridge. So yeah, so I know a couple of people have done their Portuguese water bread at night and then left their bowl overnight and then come back in the morning and it's all spilling out the top of it. You know, there's nothing, you can overproof bread, but yeah, but you can slow the process down by, and yeah, you can actually put your whole jug in the fridge if you want to, or you can transfer it to a bowl as well if you want to. The other thing is, I don't know if I talked about this last week, but I definitely mentioned this at the class I did recently at Pizza Express, that with when you're doing pizza dough, which of course is exactly the same, you know, technique that we've just talked about, you can make your pizza pizza dough, cut it up into portions, you know, so 4 or 6 portions, whatever you have. And then you can either put them just in bowls into the freezer like that, or you can roll them out so you can get everything ready and have them flat, ready to take out and put your toppings on and straight in the oven. So that's quite a nice just hack for, you know, having pizzas ready to go. But if you're not proving your pizza dough, you would probably do it in those bowls, let them come up to temperature in your so you defrost them, let them come up to, and as they're coming up to temperature, they're proving as that's happening, and then you're ready to roll them out and put your toppings on. But that's it's a really nice hack actually for having fresh baked bread in the morning, is just doing that slow proof overnight.
Right, thank you.
Brilliant. Any other questions? And what I was going to say, and I didn't talk about it tonight, is the fact that you can make, you know, obviously if you're gluten free, or you know you've got dietary requirements, you can, you know, it's the beauty of Thermomix, is that you can make things according to what you can have. So there's some really lovely gluten-free breads. Some of them are just like, they look like a normal bread, but they're just using gluten-free flour. Some of them will use things like xanthan gum to help with the structure. And then you've got other types of breads that don't use, they're not like a traditional bread, like the nut and seed loaf, for example, is beautiful. And it's all nuts and seeds, and there's eggs in there as well. There's a little bit of coconut flour. That's a great recipe. It's really tasty. And it's got, like, you know, pumpkin seeds on the top. It's a lovely, lovely recipe. So if you've got dietary requirements, and particularly if you're gluten-free or celiac, have an explore and a play with recipes. And if anybody needs help with finding recipes, please do let me know, because I'm really happy to help you. You can also make your own flour as well in the Thermomix, and I think that's an interesting thing, again, if you've got you know, dietary requirements. So for example, making your own almond flour, rice flour, buckwheat is something. Buckwheat actually isn't wheat, it's a seed, and it's used as a main component in French galettes. And so that's, you know, you can make your own flour so that you can make galettes at home using buckwheat groats, which you can buy in the shop. So that's something to explore as well. And you would use your shortcut mode for chopping to make those flours. So you should be able to see when you go into chop mode, you should be able to find a section that talks about grinding. So that's something to think about as well. Lovely. Any other questions? No? Not so far. Okay, excellent. Maybe, I should chop this. Oh, it's still quite warm. I wanted to chop the bread so that I could show you. Maybe shall I cheat and do a little bit? It is really good to let your bread totally cool down before you cut it, just because it's still kind of cooking. You know, and it's harder to cut when it's warm. I can get a little bit gluey, but yeah, hopefully you can see that.
Nice.
So that's what that looks like. So when you cut it, you can see all the steam coming out. When you cut it when it's hot, it squashes it all down. When I let that cool down a bit, you'll be able to see bigger air bubbles through it because it'll hold its shape better. But you know, I just think this is a fantastic bread. It smells beautiful. It looks like a really expensive loaf of bread. You know, that whole loaf has, you know, I think it was about 300 grams or 260 grams. I can't remember now. I did the smaller version of it. It's not a huge amount of flour. It's really cheap. You know, if you go to buy a nice, you know, baked loaf of bread in the shop, you've got to pay £4 or £5 for it. So to be able to make it for pennies in your house, you know, I think this is where Thermomix really starts to pay for itself, you know, in these sort of basics: bread, yogurt, sauces, that sort of thing.
Looks,
Fantastic.
yes, thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much. Well, look, I'll let you go. Now I'm not doing a session next week because I'm actually in the UK for a Thermomix meeting next Thursday, so I'll be on the dance floor this time, hopefully. So yes, it'll be the week after that. And we're gonna still do baking, but we'll be looking at cakes at that stage. And I'm gonna get a colleague of mine called Kay. She's gonna come along and help me because she's brilliant at cakes. And yeah, again, I'm not much of a baker, but I can produce pretty decent stuff in the Thermomix. So yeah, so she's going to come and give me some of her cake wisdom. So thank you so much for coming. I will follow this up as always with a little handout that's got, you know, some of the recipes that we talked about this evening. If anybody's got any feedback for me or anything that they'd like me to cover, the other things that I'm hoping to do through the rest of this course are I'll do a session on the long cook functions, which is fermentation, slow cooking, and sous vide. So that's definitely going to be a session that we do that might need to be split into as well. And yeah, but if anybody's got anything that they'd like me to cover, please let me know. We will also go back and do some more on sauces too, because I love sauces. Okay, thank you so much for sharing your Thursday evening with me. Take care. Talk soon.